Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to be joined by Shane Kanady from SourceAmerica today. I'm on the road, so I'm actually on holiday, so I'm just here to say hi and fleeting goodbye because actually I want to stay married, so I need to go and join my wife on holiday. So hi Shane, and bye Shane, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I appreciate you letting me go.
Yes, and have a fun vacation and go be obedient to your wife, like all
Thank you.
good husbands.
All right,
Just
bye-bye.
kidding. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. So Shane, will you mind tell the audience more about who you are, what you do, and also today we're going to talk about a lot of the work you've been doing with future of work.
Okay. Yeah, happy to. So thank you so much for having me. This is a great honor to join you today. Been very much looking forward to this, so thank you for the opportunity. I work at SourceAmerica. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization, domestic in the United States. And our mission is to work with a network of nonprofit organizations all across the country who provide various levels of supports and services to facilitate the employment of persons with disabilities through a variety of channels. And we are a unique entity in that because we're a central nonprofit agency under a federal program here in the United States. So sort of an interesting, unique configuration, but we've been doing that for around 45 years or so. Within the organization, we do a lot of different things outside of purely facilitating some of the employment outcomes of the program. For example, I'm in our Government Affairs and Public Policy Office currently, soon to be heading up our Workforce Development Division, which is a new change for me. But within Government Affairs and Public Policy, we do a tremendous amount of advocacy on Capitol Hill, working with our Senate and House offices to help advise them on policies for the inclusion of persons with disabilities through employment. And for the past 2.5 years, I've focused on that primarily, and also joining in the research on future of work as an issue area for me. And then I get to also have the great fortune of working with some of our domestic and international representation and partnerships, which is a very fulfilling thing I get to do, a lot of fun, very enriching in my life experience, but also really makes me feel like I'm contributing to a larger conversation.
Thank you, Shane. In the area of future of work, have you done any studies recently?
Yes. So over the past year, so back from May of 2018, we've released a number of papers on the topic of the future of work. Starting in May, actually, our initial baseline study called the Future of Work in the Disability Community, really looking holistically within the United States as a focal point, because that's where we operate. And then several other papers that we released that were kind of signaling some of the social innovation work we were doing in that space, and also how we were acting as a convener with other stakeholder groups to have a very robust conversation with many different viewpoints on the topic. So I think we released 6 original papers in 2018, and 2 additional papers that we worked with an outside firm to help with some independent perspective.
So when you talk with organizations about inclusion and work for people with disabilities, is there areas where you find the conversation that needs to be more explained, or organizations more or less they understand how can they do that by themselves?
It's interesting. A lot of the conversations start from a very well-intended question. What kind of work can people with disabilities do, right? So you understand the context of the question that's being asked, but it's really kind of a misnomer in the thought process, right? Starting from that premise, it's really about identifying the unique talents and attributes that anybody has that fulfills a need for an organization, a business need, and a very fulfilling, meaningful application of work. So I think in a lot of cases, it's even starting from that context of understanding the community in which they would like to engage, and then taking it from there to really have a more expansive conversation about the broad diversity of the community fulfilling any number of potential roles for any company based on the talent that is inherently there.
So Shane, I know in the United States, a lot of people assume that Source America, and I might be incorrect, maybe I'm the one that's assuming this, but that a lot of the work that y'all do is supporting people with intellectual disabilities, people that are neurodiverse on the spectrum and things like that. And I don't think that's really true. I think that Source America works with the community of people with disabilities, but I was just wondering if you would elaborate on that. And also, when we talk about future of work, a lot of people are talking about future of work, but the reality is it means different things to different people depending on how they're talking about it. And so I was wondering if you would also elaborate on what is this, when you say future of work, what does that mean to you as the author, but also to Source America? What do you mean by using that term? Because everybody has a different definition in their head.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. So I'll answer your first. So Source America, through our network of nonprofit organizations, serve the broad diversity of the disability community. So about half the individuals that are served through the programs are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also serve people with impacts of mental health, people that have potential other impacts of disabilities, ambulatory disabilities, those sorts of things, but also serving veterans, disabled veterans, wounded warriors as well. So really, it's really cuts across kind of the diversity of the community, but about half the people that we serve are people with IDD. And when we talk about the future of work, so our definition of the future of work, and it's an interesting space to be in because we have gravitated away from a preoccupation with robots and artificial intelligence as like the main construct of this topic. But for us, it really is, it's the convergence of societal, legislative, economic, and technological factors that are impacting how, when, and where people will work. And from our perspective, what is that direct implication for persons with disabilities in the United States? The unique considerations that might come along with different societal constructs for what that means around inclusion, around the different policies that might be in place or emerging that really represent a movement towards greater expectations of inclusion. What does that mean? And then how is that an enabler or potentially an inhibitor of those things, depending on how you enter into that conversation and really maximize those opportunities. So when we talk about the future of work, we really see it as the convergence of those factors. And then we really pursue that topic through research, through advocacy, and through social innovation projects.
And one thing that I'm seeing in the United States, but I'm also seeing it in other countries that I'm very concerned about, is that there's so many corporations trying to include people with disabilities, and I applaud all of the efforts. And they're sometimes getting very mixed messages from the disability persons organizations, business organizations that are supposed to support them. Well, you're not any good if you don't spend money with me here, and if you don't do this. And it's a lot of the conversations I see happening in the United States are being led by money, and that's a little bit of who we are. But at the same time, it's troubling to me because I see people with more profound disabilities or multiple disabilities, or maybe what we would call, I don't like the word severe disabilities, but they're being left out, continuing to be left out. And in the United States, we have not done as good of a job with employing people with disabilities as other countries. For example, UK is doing a much better job of employing individuals with disabilities than the United States is. And it's not really about, ooh, you're better than, it's not even all that. I just wish that in the United States, we would take a little bit more of a look at the successes that we're having in other parts of the country, which is one reason, other parts of the world, which is one reason why I enjoy your work. But I am very troubled that we think that because of the broadness of the definition of disabilities in our Americans with Disabilities Act, it is very broad on purpose. Antonio just put in the chat window, the Washington Supreme Court rules that obesity is a disability. And there are a lot of Americans that are obese. So if you start looking at all the definitions that we include in disabilities, sometimes corporations can forget about the community that we were actually trying to make sure were included in the workforce, people with more severe disabilities, some of my talented employees, for example. And so I was just wondering how your reports, how the work that you're doing at SourceAmerica is trying to deal with some of these issues that are happening in the United States to cause us not to be as effective at employing people with more profound disabilities.
Sure. I think one thing that you said that really hits the nail on the head is there's this situation in which sometimes we're our own worst enemies in trying to make the progress that we all expect, right? So there's only so much social and political capital to go around. And when we, within the community, when I'm talking about I'm talking about within the disability community, when different groups with varying perspectives go to the same audiences with a variation on the same ask, it perpetuates confusion and it leads to continued inaction. And you can't really fault the audience in that case because they are receiving different messages, and you're almost putting them in a position where if I don't select to work with you, am I offending a different group? Am I putting myself in a implication of risk, especially legislators, right? That's a huge potential area of risk for them. So one of the things that we've really focused on doing through our future of work programs, as an example, is trying to convene diverse perspectives, bring kind of divergent thought together, and different stakeholder groups that might hold varying philosophical positions on different topics, who might not ordinarily work together in their normal day-to-day operations, but coming together under a unifying objective of we all recognize that the world of work is going to change in the future. We all recognize that we have shared responsibility in fulfilling a promise of a more inclusive future. So how do we work in the same direction on that, rather than acting as if it's a zero-sum game and only some of us can succeed while others cannot?
So, I often follow a lot of events related with human resources, future of work, and there are, a good number of events in the United States focus on that area, like SHRM, where all HR professionals, they all join and talk about industry best practices. And there's been a lot of conversations on diversity, but they are usually more focused on gender, on ethnicity, and around those areas. There's not really a kind of a panel to discuss disability. Do you think that the reason why that happens is because some of the points that you have highlighted? And how do you make this connection between employment for people with disabilities and actually having these conversations at the large events that where HR professionals are often present?
Sure. No, that's a great point. And I think some of it might be what we were just talking about, right? Some of the messaging that they receive that might lead them in varying different directions at the same time, which creates confusion and inaction. But some of it is just the inherent social identity of persons with disabilities and how society assigns value to different demographic groups when they're talking about diversity, and the outward representation and political or social power of those groups to affect change. And I go to many future of work related events. And for the past 2.5 years, I have found myself being the only person from a disability-based organization at those events, and asking the questions in a public forum of the panelists. Well, what about the inclusion of persons with disabilities? When you talk about all of these different trends, and you talk about automation, and you talk about the economy, and talk about what might happen as it creates potentially greater divergence in the haves and have-nots in the future, right? Where do persons with disabilities enter into that conversation, into your thought process? And when you pose that question publicly, there is power in asking that question in front of 200 people that weren't even thinking about that in the first place. And so I think part of it is unapologetically claiming a seat at the table for those conversations, getting outside of who we normally talk to within the community, We go to disability community events, right, where we kind of commiserate on the same topics, but we don't go to these other events where we really try to broaden the conversation and the perspective of those groups that are speculating or creating recommendations for how the future might work. And if you're not at the table for those conversations, by and large, you shouldn't expect to receive the benefits of what might happen as a result of their intervention. So I think it's really, it's being present in those things, and it's pursuing those conversations. And because there's a compelling argument to be made that action is needed right now to include persons with disabilities in this conversation. Otherwise, policy recommendations and different programmatic interventions that groups might come up with are going to serve to further marginalize people within society and economically, right? So it has to happen now, and we have to continue to be engaged.
Debra, you have engaged. We have engaged with Valuable 500, and Debra, you have also have this type of conversations with many organizations who are signing the Valuable 500 pledge from Caroline Casey. How do you see this conversation evolved from your side?
Well, I'm actually getting a little discouraged about what I'm seeing in the United States with the Valuable 500. To me, the Valuable 500 is such an easy yes, because there's no cost. You're not going to have to sign anything that puts your corporation at risk. And I've recently started seeing the diversity and inclusion part of the organization. It's like the accessibility part. If you have one, they want to do it, but the diversity and inclusion people don't want to do it. And I think that is confusing to me, why there's two sides at all. And then I see U.S. corporations saying, well, we'll just wait and see what everybody else does. And I get that, especially in a place where we litigate. But at the same time, I am the Americans with Disabilities Act is 29 years old, and we have been waiting to be included. And I love corporations. I love brands, and I get to talk to all these amazing brands. But I'm getting to the point where I'm getting very disappointed with the disability groups that are not serving our community. I'm getting disappointed with the disability groups that are only following the money. One big corporation gives this disability group all this money, and it's pretty much that's it. That corporation owns the conversation. Nobody else can join. I know one large corporation gave a bunch of money to a group in the United States, and I talked to some of the other corporations. They're like, well, we only gave $15,000, so we understand we're not going to be at the table. And I think that is really a problem in the United States, not just the United States. It's happening all over the world. But it seems like some of the disability leaders and groups have forgotten who the community is they're supposed to be supporting. The community is the community of people with disabilities. And yes, we're struggling as a community to have a voice and to have a strong voice. I think we can learn a lot from the efforts that LGBTQ, have done and how they pulled together to really fight as a community. I think we still have the opportunity there. And I think the work that we've done, Antonio, with AXSChat and with other shows are helping break down some of these barriers. I also see the young people with disabilities in the United States. They seem to be coming to me more and more, maybe because they see I'm open, saying, we're really tired of your generation, Debra, not wanting to retire, and you will never give us the microphone. You all are never going to retire. Our voices are never going to matter. And it's, we see older white people, mainly males, still holding all the conversations. When is it our turn? So there's this convergence happening, which I think is very important. And I think some of us, including me, have to be brave enough to say, I'm going to call BS on what I'm seeing, and I'm about to write an article that I'm going to turn into Forbes about this conversation. I'm not going to be ugly. I'm not naming names. I think a lot of people know all these groups that are with us or are not with us, but I think it's time for capital, it's all being all about money. We can't do that anymore, because it's what Shane, you were saying. This is going to continue to leave us behind. Now, you mentioned SHRM. SHRM has brought me in to talk about disability inclusion multiple times, and other leaders. So they're trying, but somehow we have also now gotten in camps in that, well, I'm all about D&I. Oh, well, I'm all about accessibility. Well, I'm not going to listen to either one of you. I'm going to talk about inclusive design. Well, I'm not. So it's like all these camps are confusing the corporations and the brands and the people that are trying to make a difference. And I think somebody's going to have to be brave enough. And I'm going to pull, especially everything I'm walking with my daughter with Down syndrome being so sick right now. I'm just not going to put up with, and my husband acquiring a horrible disability, dementia. This is real to me. And if you are a disability leader and you're not doing the right thing by our community, which means you're not listening to the corporations that are just giving you money just so you'll hush, but you're going to do the right thing by our community, then I think we're going to have to get a lot more vocal about this. So,
let me just throw a little bit some to the mix. Now, I think Accenture, they released a report on inclusion, and they actually create a case for the employment of people with disabilities. They created an index. So, they are very well known in the industry. They are a company with a very interesting impact in digital transformation. So if they were able to create that case, if they have people from their side who understand that well, unlike other people in other organizations like IBM, our own, or even at Siemens, why do you see that other organizations are not able to follow that? Are not able to see that as a reference for them?
Jane,
Yeah.
do you want to? Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think, Antonio, what you're talking about really gets to the heart of some of the exploration that we've done, is the core narrative of the breakdown and the larger systems and constructs of employment of persons with disabilities in the United States, to us, always comes back to the social identity question, right? We can try to affect the behavior of people within the system, and we can spend a lot of our time and energy talking about employment, talking about education, talking about policymaking in silos in different ways. But if you're not affecting inherently the way that society assigns value to people and the investment that they're willing to make, then you're not going to see true behavior change, right? So the work that Accenture has done is appealing to the business sense of private sector, right? That's important because it's a part of the conversation, and you're meeting people where they are in that conversation. But the underpinning of all of these things should be an unapologetic confronting of the social identity-based barriers that are really impacting this conversation.
Such a good point, Shane. And you know what I'm seeing also happening, and I know you know this too. So I assume SourceAmerica is a nonprofit. Is that a correct assumption? Okay.
Correct.
And I'm seeing that there are some self-appointed disability groups that have decided that the nonprofits and the disability persons organizations, they don't understand the complexity of business. They don't understand brands. And so they don't really belong in the conversation. And I've known brands that have reached out to some of these business to business groups that are supposed to be supporting corporations, including people with disabilities. And, they're applauding, corporations that have hired 5 people with disabilities over 5 years that have, 500,000 employees. I'm exaggerating, but not that much. And because those corporations have given them so much money. But I see the disability persons organizations being left out of the conversations and uninvited to the conversations. And so I've spent a lot of time recently on my show, Human Potential at Work, interviewing leaders, Dr. Kirk Adams of the American Foundation for the Blind, and we've talked about deaf and things like that, and the deaf community and how valuable they are. But you're right. As long as we keep deciding as society that people with disabilities are broken, if they speak a different language, that because they speak sign language, or they cannot see in the traditional manner, or whatever our reasons, we are going to continue to fail. And we're a developed country. We're spending so much money on disability inclusion, but our numbers, even though they're rising slowly, still we are not seeing people with disabilities, especially more profound disabilities, as adding value to our workforce, because we are not including them.
And even as you look at the economic indicators of progress, right? If we get hung up looking at the same numbers that kind of everyone, it permeates like the news cycle, right? The unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is a false indicator of progress. It really takes it ignores the fact that there are millions and millions of people not even connected to the labor force in the first place. And so when we focus on the unemployment rate and unprecedented levels of economic kind of the status that we're in currently in the United States, right, with the low levels of unemployment, it really ignores the true underpinning of the problem that we are talking about, right? The populations, and not just persons with disabilities, so many other populations that are completely left out of the labor market.
Right, and generally the populations of people that have darker skins than mine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you can see me, I have very light, fair Caucasian complexion, and So, Antonio.
No, in fact, what you just brought, is considering the United States, it's sometimes I have to feel that when you look at tech companies, it's a bit disappointing how white male they are. No, it's I feel that type of a disappointment, but how we are in 2019, and some organizations have about 2%, 3%. I don't even know how to express myself here.
Yeah. Well, it becomes when you try to act on those issues, right, by setting quotas and setting targets for the inclusion of various populations, right, then you're also wading into the territory of regulatory oversight and risk and fear and those sorts of things, if you're not compliant. And it's a carrot and stick approach, and we try both of those things in the United States. And so far, if you look at data over the course of time, it has not been incredibly impactful in the overall conversation of what we're talking about. So I think a lot of it still gets back to, you can put regulatory oversight to try and compel people to do something, but if you're not affecting how they assign value to people in the first place, they're not going to act in the way that you would expect or hope.
I agree, and that's what we're seeing too. And it's just what I found, and Antonio and Neil really helped me see this, but I find, and I know, Shane, that you've seen this as well, but the more interesting conversations are happening outside these disability silos. And the conversations that I'm getting to have on the people-centered internet and cyber safety to make sure all children are safe, including children that have disabilities, including children that are LGBT or transgender. I know LT goes for that, but our vulnerable part of our populations that, as you said, constantly are being left out. And so I think that there is actually quite a bit of very, very powerful things happening, that some of the status quo, they don't even realize these things are happening. They don't even see it. They don't see the conversations we're having with the robotics and the AI. And Shane, the leadership you're showing at SourceAmerica with the future of work conversations. But I am putting these leaders on notice that things are changing, and we're not going to put up with this anymore. And we've got to make sure that I was recently invited to speak in New York City at a really fabulous event, and it was going to be a big deal, and I would be all that. And I told them, no, I don't want to speak. I want you instead to put on stage Lamondre Pugh, who is an amazing man with profound disabilities, and he's a man of color, and he's a brilliant voice. And put K.R. Liu up there, who is with Amazon, she was born with severe hearing loss, and she uses hearing aids, and she's brilliant and wonderful and vivacious. And she's a younging to me because she's 41 years old, but I mean, she's just fabulous. And then I recommended other younger leaders that are not being put on the stage, leaders with open, obvious disabilities that can really talk about who are they. I have a lot of hope for the young people, but I think what the older people among us, I'm older than all of you guys, but we have to make sure that we are opening the door wide for the others. I mentioned a couple of times there was a trend on Twitter, and it was trending white privilege. And I thought, oh, don't go in there, Debra. It's going to be so scary. But I thought, no, I'm going in. So I went in and they said, what are you doing with your white privilege? And I said, I'm opening the door wide behind me so the young people with diversity can come in. Everybody, because human beings are diverse. That's what makes us so amazing as human beings. And so I think leaders need to look at yourself, and you need to ask yourself some really important questions. Are you doing the right thing by the community, or are you just only doing what you're told by money? And I'll give you one more thing, then I'm going to stop. We were really blessed at my company. We were told about a bill, AB 1395, that was happening in California, and it was about privacy, but we were afraid there could be implications to the community of people with disabilities because these voice devices, we use them more than the rest of the population. So if you take these voice devices away from us, you're going to hurt our community. And they had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to lobby and make this happen. Well, my team got involved in 3 days before the bill was to be passed. And we talked to the legislators, and we went all over social media, and a lot of our partners that are part of the AXSChat community helped, and they pulled the bill. And they said, we don't want this to hurt people with disabilities. So these gigantic corporations couldn't stop this because they were making it all about themselves. But when we ask, please, Assemblyman, Cunningham, please just make sure this isn't going to hurt our community, immediately they stopped it. Yeah. And even we were shocked. We were shocked that they would listen. We're not used to politicians listening to our community. And so there is a sea change happening, and a lot of these community leaders that are not taking care of our community, they're going to be left because they should be left. And I think these conversations we're having, where we are really wanting to change society so that people with disabilities and underserved populations can truly be included, this is truly the future of work. So let me hush and give you and Antonio time to talk. Sorry.
Sure. No, I was going to share some recent success that we've been having on the policy front as well. And what we have found is when you come to these meetings and you take maybe a bill that's already been introduced, or something that was introduced in the prior Congress that they're thinking about reintroducing, and you show to them very directly the language that you've used in this is unintentionally exclusionary. Right. You have a generalized notion of what the population is when you talk about the future of employment. There's a picture in your head by default of what does an employee look like. And when you do not give consideration to the broad diversity of the labor force in that, you might be unintentionally negatively impacting and creating greater divides and greater kind of divergence in society and in the economy. And so we took several future of work-related bills and just did red line edits where the language could be expansive, could be more inclusive in the concept of the population, to include traditionally underrepresented populations, specifically persons with disabilities, or however that would be identified. But the fact that you're affecting language in such a way that you're making it more inclusive is a step in the right direction, right? But one of the things that I try to be very sensitive about, and I think what you were really talking about, Debra, with young leaders in the disability community having that opportunity, and I've had the opportunity to work with many very exciting young leaders in that area. But even within my role, I try to be very sensitive to the fact that I do not personally identify as a person with a disability. I have extensive family history with that topic. And so it's very close to me, and I've been in a different sort of kind of impacted role when it comes to that conversation. But I also do not present myself or represent myself as speaking on behalf of the community or speaking on behalf of persons with disabilities. I'm asking questions, and I'm trying to do what I can to open doors and be a convener, because that's the role that I've fortunately been placed in doing. But it's about opening the doors so that persons with disabilities and those affected by what we're talking about have the floor to then take it and run with it, right? And to really talk about what they desire for the future.
and we need allies. I'm not part of the LGBT community, but I refuse to let those people continue to suffer and be attacked, especially the members of LGBT community that have disabilities. I'm tired of it. So, Antonio, I know we're getting near to the end, but let me turn it over to you.
No, I know. I think it's I know one of the roles of leaders is actually do that, is provide voices to others. That's what leadership is about. Is not to have all the lights focus on themselves permanently. Is actually to give those lights to someone else. That's what leading is about. No, we have done some work in Cork in some of our groups, like Cork Healthy Cities, where we do a lot of work to make Cork, the city, more inclusive. And my door is to open the door for organizations or people to participate in our conversations. And when we are creating events, making sure that they are inclusive and everyone can join. So I think our role is basically to give that space and provide those opportunities and be able to step back. Okay, I think it's very important that we can step back. Okay, and let others to shine and speak. And when they do that, we don't need to be there. Okay, no, we're fine. They can just fly by themselves. Okay, we're just somehow to facilitate.
Don't they need my help?
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
Well said.
absolutely. Yeah, at the social innovation projects that we've done through our Future of Work program, we specifically set out to ensure that representation within those groups is at least half persons with disabilities, if not a greater representation, so that what is being developed and what is being implemented is actually authentically based on what people desire for the future that they want, right, and that they aspire to, not what we project that we believe that they need or want.
Agree. And that's why we were really excited about the work that you're doing, Shane. And, we all have to be allies to each other, and we have to really look forward and see what kind of world we want for ourselves, for our children, for our friends, our loved ones, and we have to be part of this positive change. And I will tell you, I'm turning down projects where people are asking me to give me a lot of money, but I do not believe that their heart is in this. And whenever we recently did this lobbying effort with the AB 1395, we were not paid to do that. But we did not want to be paid at that time. We wanted to make sure our community was okay. And and then I think we should all take the time to thank Assemblyman Jordan Cunningham for listening. So I'm optimistic, but I think people like me have to be more brave and really start calling out what is actually happening, because I see it, everybody's seeing it, but everybody's afraid. I know this one very, very large nonprofit in the United States reached out to a business-to-business group and said, I wish that when you're having conversations about IDD, intellectual disabilities, that you would expand it a little bit and, please keep talking about autism. But, we have people with Down syndrome, we have people with alcohol fetal syndrome, we have a lot of other, spectrums on the IDD range. And when that happened, this group started getting cut out of all conversations, uninviting to events. They were being punished for having the nerve to say, could we just expand the conversation? So I think it's time for new leadership, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So that's why we were highlighting your work, Shane, and we really appreciate you. We want to make sure that we thank Barclays Access for supporting us, and MicroLink and MyClearText, making sure everything that we do is accessible. Also, any disability groups that are putting out videos or anything podcast and you're not being accessible, you're becoming part of the problem. We all have to walk the walk. So, Shane, thank you for being on the program today. We want to provide links to the work that you're doing. I know you've been invited to speak in Geneva at the ILO Global Business Disability Network. I've been invited to speak as well. We know other leaders we want to invite to come there. There is progress happening in the United States, but we need to stamp out some of this, it's all about me, mentality, and we need to say this is all about the community and changing society. So thank you so much for your leadership, Shane. And Antonio, continue to love the way your brain works, and I'm glad Neil behaved and made his wife happy today on their holiday, and we look forward to continuing this conversation on Tuesday during the tweet chat. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.